4:26 local time. The Strait of Hormuz was still dark when radar operators aboard a U.S. Navy destroyer noticed the first fast-moving contacts cutting south from Iranian waters. 21 miles wide at its narrowest point, the shipping corridor was already crowded with outbound oil tankers, cargo vessels, and escort traffic moving through one of the most sensitive waterways on Earth. Inside the Combat Information Center, screens glowed blue across dark compartments, while warning tones quietly stacked across multiple consoles. At first, it looked routine. Another pressure maneuver, another aggressive approach in the Gulf. But within minutes, it became clear this operation was something far bigger. The destroyer was operating as part of Carrier Strike Group security patrol near the central shipping lane when operators tracked multiple IRGC fast attack boats moving in coordinated formation toward a foreign-linked commercial cargo vessel. Their speed kept increasing. Their spacing remained tight. No civilian vessel moves like that in darkness unless something is wrong. On the bridge, officers watched the geometry collapse in real time. One group angled toward the cargo ship's port side. Another moved behind it. A third formation remained farther north, almost like Overwatch. The boats were not harassing traffic. They were isolating a target. Then the radio traffic changed everything. Unidentified armed vessels. Alter course immediately. Coalition naval forces are monitoring your movement. No response. Only acceleration. Less than 4 minutes later, infrared systems aboard the destroyer confirmed armed personnel moving between the Iranian boats. Then came the transfer. A boarding team crossed onto the cargo vessel under darkness, while the surrounding fast craft tightened their defensive ring around the ship. This was no random confrontation. This was a seizure operation unfolding in one of the busiest maritime choke points in the world. And what happened next pushed the situation dangerously close to open conflict. Stay with this story, because the operation unfolding in the Gulf that morning would expose something much larger moving beneath the surface of the strait. The sea remained calm, but inside the destroyer, the atmosphere changed instantly. Sailors sealed internal compartments, while electronic warfare teams activated defensive systems across the ship. Radar tracks multiplied along the northern edge of the corridor. Additional movement, additional contacts. At 4:34, the destroyer launched an MH-60 or Seahawk helicopter from its aft deck. Rotor wash exploded across the dark water, while deck crews guided the aircraft upward into the night sky. Within moments, the helicopter moved north toward the seized vessel. The crew saw the scene immediately. Armed men on deck. Cargo containers stacked across the center line of the ship. Multiple fast attack boats, circling at high speed less than 400 meters from the hull. Through the helicopter's infrared system, operators watched at least one senior figure directing movement on board, while smaller Iranian vessels repositioned around the tanker corridor. The footage was transmitted directly back to the destroyer, then forwarded to CENTCOM, then to the Pentagon. Inside command centers thousands of miles away, analysts began watching the operation unfold live. But the most dangerous part was not the boarding itself. It was the way the operation was being protected. The Iranian boats were not acting independently. Their movements were disciplined, structured. Every turn created pressure against commercial traffic, while also limiting the destroyer's maneuver space. Tankers began slowing to avoid collision risks. Horns echoed across the water. Wake turbulence spread through the narrow corridor. The strait itself was becoming part of the trap. At 4:41, the U.S. Navy issued another warning. You are interfering with protected maritime traffic. Disengage immediately. Again, no response. Instead, 2 Iranian boats accelerated toward the destroyer's forward arc, while another formation shifted west toward outbound tanker lanes. It forced the American vessel into defensive repositioning. And then another layer appeared. U.S. surveillance systems detected additional Iranian boats leaving nearby coastal positions farther north along the Iranian shoreline. More heat signatures, more engines, more movement. The operation was expanding. For the first time that morning, commanders aboard the destroyer began considering the possibility that this was not just a seizure. It was a coordinated maritime pressure operation designed to test how far coalition forces would go before responding directly. At the center of it all was the boarding commander, Initial intelligence linked him to previous IRGC naval operations in the Gulf. Not a field-level officer. Someone higher. Someone trusted with command authority during strategic maritime confrontations. That changed the stakes immediately. The destroyer relayed an escalation alert to the carrier strike group operating farther south in the Arabian Sea. Within minutes, F/A-18 Super Hornets began launch preparation aboard the carrier deck. Below dim red lighting, deck crews loaded weapons while steam built across the catapult system. By early morning, fighter aircraft were already climbing toward the strait. But what investigators uncovered next changed the entire picture. The cargo vessel itself may not have been random. While infrared teams monitored the deck, intelligence analysts began reviewing shipping data connected to the ship's route. Questions started appearing almost immediately. Irregular routing patterns, sudden changes in port registration, incomplete cargo declarations. Inside secure command channels, officials began discussing the possibility that the vessel was carrying sensitive military-linked cargo moving to the Gulf under commercial cover. That possibility transformed the confrontation. This was no longer just about one ship. It was about what could be inside it. At 4:53, electronic interference suddenly hit navigation systems aboard multiple vessels operating inside the corridor. Short bursts, directional, focused. Iranian coastal systems were now active. Inside the Combat Information Center, sailors rerouted tactical data through hardened channels while electronic warfare operators activated countermeasure systems. Screens flickered, headsets crackled. Every console inside the compartment remained occupied. The pressure kept building. Then the geometry changed again. One Iranian patrol craft broke away from the formation at high speed and began moving northeast away from the cargo vessel. Infrared systems tracked multiple individuals on board. Among them was believed to be the senior IRGC commander overseeing the seizure operation. The movement triggered immediate concern. Commanders aboard the destroyer believed the officer was attempting to leave before coalition forces tightened perimeter around the area. That decision would change the entire operation. At 5:01, the carrier strike group launched its first combat air patrol into the strait. Twin-engine Super Hornets roared overhead, while radar systems locked onto surface contact below. The sound alone shifted the atmosphere across the water. Commercial crews could hear the jets long before they saw them, and for the first time, some of the Iranian boats slowed. But not all of them. Several remained aggressively positioned around the cargo ship, while others moved into blocking patterns along nearby tanker routes. The operation was becoming more dangerous by the minute. Imagine standing on the bridge of that destroyer. Dark water in every direction. Civilian tankers trapped inside narrow shipping lanes. Fast attack boats moving across your bow at high speed. Fighter aircraft overhead. Electronic interference disrupting systems. And somewhere inside that chaos, a senior IRGC commander attempting to disappear into the Gulf before sunrise. At 5:07, the U.S. Navy moved. A rapid response intercept team launched under helicopter cover while the destroyer adjusted course to cut off the escaping patrol craft near the eastern edge of the corridor. Smaller Navy vessels accelerated through the darkness while airborne crews tracked the target from above. The Iranian boat attempted to change direction twice. Too late. Within minutes, U.S. forces boxed the craft into narrowing water between commercial traffic lanes and coalition patrol positions. Then came the standoff. Warning lights illuminated the water while American crews issued commands over loudspeakers ordering the vessel to stop engines and prepare for boarding. The Iranian craft hesitated. One armed individual raised a weapon briefly near the rear section of the boat. Warning shots followed, not aimed directly at the crew. A controlled burst across the waterline ahead of the vessel. The message was clear. Stop now. For several seconds, nobody moved. Then the engines powered down. U.S. boarding teams crossed onto patrol craft while helicopters maintained overwatch above the scene. Armed personnel were ordered onto the deck one by one. Several complied immediately. Others resisted before eventually surrendering under encirclement pressure. Among those detained was the senior IRGC commander, believed to be leading the maritime operation. Alive, captured during an active confrontation inside one of the world's most volatile waterways. But the operation was still not over, because the cargo vessel remained inside the corridor, and Iranian coastal systems were beginning to react. At 5:16, coalition surveillance detected brief targeting radar activation from positions along the Iranian coastline overlooking the strait. The signals lasted only seconds, but it was enough to trigger defensive alerts aboard the destroyer. Close-in defense systems rotated outward, decoy launchers armed. Missile crews moved into standby posture. The risk of escalation suddenly became very real. Inside the Pentagon, live monitoring continued as commanders weighed the possibility of direct missile threats against coalition ships operating near the seizure zone. But what made this worse was not only the military pressure. It was what investigators were beginning to suspect about the cargo itself. Early inspections aboard the seized vessel reportedly identified unusual container shielding and restricted access sections inside the cargo hold. Analysts fear the ship could have been carrying sensitive military-linked equipment, moving through civilian maritime routes under disguised paperwork. That possibility widened the implications dramatically. If true, the operation was not just about seizing a ship. It was about controlling what reached the Gulf and who was moving it. This was not random harassment. This was organized maritime pressure tied directly to strategic movement through one of the most important waterways on Earth. As daylight slowly reached the horizon, coalition teams secured the cargo vessel, while civilian crew members were evacuated under armed escort. Several sailors appeared shaken after hours trapped on board during the confrontation. The tanker corridor remained unstable. Commercial traffic slowed across large portions of the strait, while regional naval forces monitored the situation closely. Fighter aircraft continued flying protective patterns overhead, while surveillance drones tracked Iranian movement along the coastline. But the deeper concern was already spreading through intelligence channels. The seizure attempt revealed how quickly maritime pressure operations could escalate inside the Gulf. A handful of fast boats, one boarding team, one narrow shipping corridor. That was all it took to place military forces, civilian vessels, and global shipping traffic inside the same expanding crisis zone. And the system behind it was bigger than many realized. Iranian fast attack operations inside the strait rely on speed, congestion, and geography. Small vessels use commercial traffic as cover while operating close enough to create constant pressure without immediately crossing into open war. The goal is not always destruction. Sometimes it is control, delay, fear, confusion. That morning showed exactly how dangerous that system could become. Inside command centers, analysts reviewed every movement frame by frame: formation spacing, communication timing, electronic interference patterns, escape routes, defensive positioning around the seized vessel. The operation looked practiced, prepared, structured long before the first boat entered the shipping lane. And that raised another disturbing possibility. How many similar operations had already been rehearsed without reaching public attention? By mid-morning, the detained commander was transferred under heavy escort away from the confrontation zone, while coalition ships maintained offensive positioning across the strait. Helicopters remained airborne. Surveillance systems remained active. No side fully backed down, because underneath the standoff, the larger strategic pressure was still there. Oil routes, military presence, regional influence, control of maritime choke points. None of that disappeared when the boat stopped moving. And somewhere along the Iranian coastline, additional fast attack craft were still sitting inside hardened facilities waiting for the next order. The final reports from that morning described the confrontation as contained, but not resolved. The radar systems remained active. The patrol routes continued. The fighter aircraft stayed armed. And the Strait of Hormuz remained exactly what it had always been: a narrow corridor where one operation, one mistake, or one decision in darkness can push the entire region dangerously close to open conflict. Because in the Gulf, pressure rarely disappears. It waits. And if you want to see how naval confrontations like this continue evolving behind the scenes of global shipping routes and military patrol zones, follow for the next investigation. Sometimes the most dangerous operations are the ones the world almost never sees.